Today we're going to be looking at just doing some basic forms practice. So you can pick whichever form you would like, a sphere or a cylinder, a cone, any of those, completely up to you. But you're going to want to sketch out 4 of those. So kind of give yourself some space on your canvas to make sure that you can add some cast shadows in there someplace on the sides. And the reason we're doing 4 is we're going to practice a few different techniques on how to use acrylic paints in here. So it gives you a little bit of experimentation time. You'll want to have your cup of water, a palette knife, a medium or small brush with you, and you'll want to have some of your colors over on your palette because we'll be mixing a few things today and you don't want to get those into your cups. It's important that you're using that. The first one we're going to look at is really kind of fun. It's using your palette knife instead of or in place of your brush. And just like we would any forms, we want to start with our darkest side. And you can go through and you can almost paint it in or spread it in a little bit. I'm going to cut those pointier parts in. Think of it sort of like if you're putting icing on cake or butter on bread. When you're putting it down, and we're just scooping it a little bit off the palette to get some in there. I'm going to change out my colors as I work my way across because it's going to be getting lighter. If you have too much left over after you scoop a little up, you can always just wipe it back over on your palette like that. And then you can work at angles, stripes. You might choose to blop it a little bit more versus spreading it or scraping it. This is really a personalized technique when you work through this. So you can have a little bit of fun with it and just try it out. You can always, again, wipe that palette knife off if it gets too much on it. Or if you start losing your color and it's blending too much, you need to pick up some more pure color again. Go back and do that. Especially when you work towards those lighter colors, they tend to pick up the darker colors a lot faster. Okay. And as you can see, it comes out a little bit bumpy and three-dimensional, and then it doesn't hold that perfect straight sharp edge when you are working on things. It does tend to get a little bit more spread out. Got a little bit of dry on there. And then I don't want to forget my cast shadow. It's just going to be the darkest part coming off my back side over here. And sort of in that same general shape as my form. And this also can have a little bit of a sgraffito effect or impasto effect as you're scraping it and working into it. I want it a little bit darker. I can add just a smidge of black in there. I don't want to overdo it on the black and have it take over things and make me ignore the other colors. So I just use a little in there to make sure that that bottom edge is darker and has that shadow in there, or a shadow feel to it. Okay. So that would be if you're using your palette knife to work your paint in. Then you can do something similar with your paint brushes. Again, you can start with the darker side of things. So if I wanted to start with the darker side of my cone, I could do that. And I want to cut those edges in a little bit more. I'm going to add a base layer and then come back in with my lighter side and work the light into the darker. If I get too much on there, I can always wipe it off on a towel. I try to avoid washing my brush too much and getting water built up in there. It tends to take over my paint, and I want to keep my paint a little bit thicker. And then my lightest side over here. Add in my yellows. If it's not enough or it's not light enough, go back in with some more. Picked up a little purple on accident there. I'm going to sweep that back out. And you can leave this separated if you want, or you can go back in and smooth it out. If you're going to do that, you're going to want to rinse off your brush and dry it and pull from the lighter side to the darker side, and then a little bit from the darker side to the lighter side. Make sure you get all of the water and the paint out of there. And then I'm going to go back and smooth and very gently with a feather touch. I'm sweeping this direction, then I'm going to use the back side of my brush, rinse it first, and dry it. And then pull back gently the other direction. You want to do this before things completely dry. If they're getting a little dry, pick up some more paint to sweep back that other direction. And of course we, again, don't want to forget our cast shadow that goes in here. We'll make sure that that keeps in here. Still a lot of paint in my brush. I'm gonna take that out. And then I can work back a little bit. The brush is just a little damp, so I can pick up some of this paint while it's still wet, so that it doesn't get too far out here. And then I wipe it back off of my towel, so I'm picking up the paint and pulling it off the canvas. It's still not quite dark enough there. I'm gonna add in just a little bit of purple on that shadow. Not too much. Don't want it to go completely separate. And I'm using a really gentle brush on here. I'm not pushing very hard at all because I want to blend those colors together a little bit, but I don't want them to get out of control. I'll run some purple down this back edge. Too much on my brush, again, take some off. Tilt my brush at an angle. I'm going to pick up the extra, kind of like a scooping motion or like a squeegee type effect. Smooth that out a little bit on that edge. So there's still a little bit of a deep shadow on there. I can pull it sideways. A really thick layer of paint in there that's creating that. Pull that shadow around just a little, and the same down here. Right? So when we're looking at things, you can always keep going back in and pulling a little more color in some of those layers as you're in there to even them out. So, like that. Now, another one that you could do is you could keep more of that color and more of that impressionism type look. We go down here, and similar to your palette knife, you're going to let it stay thick or thin. You're not going to go back and smooth things out. But you're going to leave them a little bit bloppy. Again, you want to work your lighter into your darker so that your darker doesn't take over your lighter too much. A little bit back and forth like that. Add just a little bit of purple for the shadow around this edge. Same thing for that shadow. I'm going to keep it floppy. Those short little strokes that can go in there. Back in, add some red. I am hitting my tape where it's taped down, so I'll have to remember to pull my tape up before my paint dries. It has a tendency to combine with the paint and then not want to come up if you let it dry completely. Okay, now I'm going to switch to a smaller. This time I'm going to use a smaller rounded brush for this last one. Let's see, I think I'm just going to play around with it a little bit. So this one we went horizontal. This one we'll keep more vertical. And you'll notice when we work those acrylic paints, we work them back and forth a little bit from the light into the dark and the dark into the light to get those nice blends. And they're going to be blended well if you keep your paint wet. If you take a while to work, you might want to add an extender to your paint. These ones are so small, we shouldn't have to do that. You should be able to work fast enough that you're able to get everything in there that you would like. And then for this bottom edge, it's going to have a little shadow, so I can pull this over a bit more. I'm going to go sideways on my harder edge of my brush to get that edge in there, but then go back and very gently feather tip just the tips of the brush back in here vertically, so we don't lose our vertical pull when we're working on that one. And then I'm going to go back in and add the cast shadow. Try and stay thin, and then I can get thicker as I move towards the back. I'm going to ride that edge. Go. Still have some paint in there. I want to make sure I get all that paint out before I pick up a little bit more of the green. Bring that just into this part up here to give it a little hint of matching the cone itself. Okay, so there we have 4 different styles that you can paint in. Because you are in a more advanced painting class, you can select the style that you want to work with for this term. You might want to do more realistic or impressionistic. You could work with a palette knife the entire time. That part is completely up to you. You can try a little bit of everything, but this was our little demo for the day that we were working on. You can put that over in the drying cupboard. It should be taped to your board for drying, and then go ahead and clean up your supplies.